This is part 2 of chapter 4, Stephen King, Fairy Tale. Will you be taking care of the dog until Mr. Bowditch gets out of the hospital? This time I was the one who stuck out my hand. Radar didn't growl, but watched closely for any funny business. Hope the pictures are okay. Come on, Radar. I started toward the house when I looked back. Harriman was crossing the street to talk to Mrs. Richland. There was nothing I could do about that, so I went around back with Radar coming along at my heel. I noticed that after walking for a bit, she limbered up. I put the ladder under the back porch where there was also a snow shovel and a big old pair of gardening shears that looked as rusty as the bolt on the gate and would probably be just as hard to operate. Radar peered down at me from the hall, from halfway up the steps, which was cute enough for me to take another picture. I was getting foolish about her. I knew it, and I didn't mind owning it. There was cleaning products under the kitchen sink and a neat pile of paper grocery bags with the Tiller logo on them. There were also rubber gloves. I put them on, took a bag, and went on poop patrol. Got plenty, too. On Sunday, I put Radar on her leash again and walked her down the hill to our house. She moved slowly at first, both because of her arthritic hips and because she clearly wasn't used to being away from her home. She kept looking at me for reassurance, which touched my heart. After a while, though, she began to make her way more easily and confidently, stopping to sniff telephone poles and to squat here and there, so other passing dogs would know that Radar of Bowditch has been there. Dad was home. Radar initially shrank back from him, growling, but when Dad held out his hand, she came forward enough to sniff it. Half a slice of bologna sealed the deal. We stayed for an hour or so. Dad quizzed me about my photo shoot and laughed when I told him how Harriman had tried to interview me about the inside of the house and how I'd shut him down. He'll get better if he sticks with the new business, Dad said. The Weekly Sun is just the place where he starts building his clipbook. By then, Radar was snoozing beside the couch where Dad had once passed out drunk. He bent down and ruffled her fur. I bet she was an engine when she was in her prime. I thought of Andy's story about the terrifying beast he had encountered 4 or 5 years earlier and agreed. You should see if he has any dog meds for her arthritis, and probably she should have a tablet for heartworm. I'll check around. I had taken her off the leash, but now I clipped it to her collar. She raised her head. We should go back. Don't want to keep her here for the day. She looks pretty comfortable. No, I should take her back. If he asks why, I'd tell him the truth, because I didn't think Howard Bowditch would like it. He didn't ask why. Okay, want to ride? That's all right. I think she'll be fine if we go slow. And she was. On the way back up the hill, she seemed glad to be sniffing the grass that wasn't her own. 6. On Monday afternoon, a neat little green van with Tiller and Sons painted on the side, in gold no less, pulled up. The driver asked me where Mr. Bowditch was. I told him, and he handed the bags to me over the gate as if that were the usual thing. So I guess it was. I filled in the amount on the blank check Dad had signed, pretty horrified at the idea of 105 scoots for 3 bags of groceries, and handed it back. There were lamb chops and ground sirloin, which I put in the freezer. I wasn't going to eat his food, cookies accepted, but I wasn't going to let it go to waste either. With that taken care of, I went down the cellar, closing the door behind me so Radar wouldn't try to follow. It wasn't in the least bit serial killerish, only musty and dusty, as if nobody had been down there for a long time. The overhead lights were fluorescent bars, one of them flickery and half dead. The floor was rough cement. There were tools on pegs, including the scythe, which looked like the kind of thing Old Man Death carries in the cartoons. In the center of the room was a work table covered by a drop cloth. I lifted it for a peek and saw a partial assembled jigsaw puzzle that appeared to have a zillion pieces. From what I could see, there was no box to check it against. It was meant to be a mountain meadow with the Rockies in the background. There was a folding chair set up at one end of the table where most of the remaining pieces were spread out. The seat was dusty, from which I deduced that Mr. Bowditch hadn't been working his puzzle for quite some time. Maybe he'd given up. I know I would have. A lot of what was left to be assembled was plain old blue sky without even a single cloud to break the monotony. I'm talking about this at more length than it deserves, maybe, but then again, maybe not. There was something sad about it. I couldn't express the reason for that sadness then, but I'm older now and I think I can. It was about the jigsaw, but it was also the antique TV and the haul of old reading matter. It was about an elderly man's solitary pursuits, and the dust on the folding chair, on the books and the magazines suggested that even those were winding down. The only things in the cellar that looked like they were used regularly were the washer and the dryer. I fluffed the cover back over the puzzle and checked out a cabinet between the furnace and the water heater. It was old-fashioned, full of drawers. I found screws in one, pliers and wrenches in another, stacks of rubber-banded receipts in a third, chisels and what had to be a whetstone in the fourth. I put the whetstone in my pocket, grabbed the scythe, and went upstairs. Radar wanted to jump on me, and I told her to stand clear so I didn't accidentally poke her with the blade. We went out back where I knew I could get 4 bars on my phone. I sat on the steps and Radar sat beside me. I opened Safari, typed sharpening with a whetstone, looked at a couple of videos, and then went to work. It didn't take long to put a pretty keen edge on the scythe. I took a picture to show Mr. Bowditch and then biked to the hospital. Found him sleeping, biked back in the late afternoon light, and fed Radar. Missed baseball a little. Well, maybe more than a little. 7. On Tuesday afternoon, I started scything the tall grass, first in the front yard and then in the back. After an hour or so, I looked at my red hands and knew that blisters would soon form there if I wasn't careful. I put Radar on her leash, walked her down to the house, and found a pair of Dad's work gloves in the garage. We walked back up the hill, going slowly in deference to Radar's sore hips. I whacked away at the grass on the side while Radar snoozed, then fed her and knocked off for the day. Dad cooked hamburgers on the backyard grill, and I ate 3, plus cherry cobbler for dessert. Dad drove me to the hospital and waited downstairs, reading reports while I went to visit Mr. Bowditch. I saw he'd also had a hamburger, plus mac and cheese on the side, but he hadn't eaten much of either. Of course, he hadn't spent 2 hours swinging a scythe, and although he tried to be pleasant and looked at some new pictures of Radar, plus one of the scythe and another of his half-cut front lawn, it was clear to me he was in a lot of pain. He kept pushing the button that released the dope. The third time he did it, it made a low buzzing sound like when a contestant on a game show gives the wrong answer. Fucking thing. I'm maxed out for an hour. Better go, Charlie, before I start barking at you because I feel miserable. Come back Friday. No, Saturday. Maybe I'll feel better by then. Any word on when they're going to let you out? Sunday, maybe. A lady came and said she wanted to help me work on he raised his big hands, bruised on the backs from the IV needles, and made quotation marks, recovery plan. I told her to fuck off. Not in those exact words. I'm trying to be a good patient, but it's hard. It's not just the pain, he made a weak circling gesture, then dropped his arms back to his coverlet. Too many people, I said. You're not used to it. You understand? Thank God somebody does. And too much noise. Before she left, the woman, her name's something like Ravenhugger, asked me if I had a bed on the first floor of my house. I don't, but the couch pulls out. Although it hasn't been made up as a bed in a long time, I guess. Maybe not ever. I only bought it because it was on sale. I'll make it up for you if you tell me where the sheets are. Do you know how to do that? As the son of a widower who had been a very active alcoholic, I did. As the son of a widower who had a very active alcoholic, I did. Also, how to wash clothes and buy groceries. I've been a good little codependent. Yes. Linen closet, 2nd floor. Have you been up there yet? I shook my head. Well, I guess now is your chance. It's across from my bedroom. Thank you. No prob. And the next time that lady comes in, tell her I'm your recovery plan. I got up. Better go and let you get some rest. I went to the door. He spoke my name and I turned back. You're the best thing that's happened to me in a long time. Then, as if speaking as much to himself as to me, I'm going to trust you. I can't see any choice. I told Dad what he'd said about me being the best thing that had happened to him, but not about the trusting part. Some instinct made me hold that back. Dad gave me a strong, one-armed hug and kissed my cheek and said he was proud of me. That was a good day. 8. On Thursday, I forced myself to knock on the shed door again. I really did not like that little building. No one knocked back or scratched. I tried to tell myself I'd imagined that weird skittering sound, but if I had, Radar had imagined it too, and I didn't think dogs were much in that imagination department. Of course, she could have been reacting to my reaction, or, if I'm going to tell the truth, she could have sensed my fear and my almost instinctive revulsion. On Friday, I trundled our lawn boy up the street and went to work on the half-tamed yard. I figured I could have it looking relatively spiff by the weekend. The following week was spring vacation, and I planned to spend a lot of it at number 1 Sycamore. I'd clean the windows, then go to work. I'd clean the windows, then go to work on the picket fence, get it standing up straight again. I thought seeing those things would cheer Mr. Bowditch up. I was moving along the Pine Street side of the house. Radar was inside, wanting nothing to do with the roaring lawn boy, when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I killed the mower and saw Arcadia Hospital on the screen. I took the call with a sinking in my gut. Sure, someone was going to tell me that Mr. Bowditch had taken a turn for the worse, or worse still, passed away. It was about him, all right, but it wasn't anything bad. A lady named Mrs. Ravensburger asked if I could come in tomorrow morning at 9 to talk about Mr. Bowditch's recovery and aftercare. I said I could, and she then asked if I could bring along a parent or guardian. I said probably. I saw your picture in the paper with that wonderful dog of his. Mr. Bowditch owes you both a debt and a gratitude. I can't read today, guys. Mr. Bowditch owes you both a debt of gratitude. I assumed she was talking about the son, and I guess she could have been, but Radar and I turned up elsewhere too, or maybe I should say everywhere. Dad came in late, as he usually did on Fridays, and he had a copy of the Chicago Tribune open to page 2, where the Trib ran a little sidebar called In Other News. It collated bite-sized items of more cheerful nature than the stuff on the front page. The one featuring Radar and me was headlined, Hero Dog, Hero Team. I wasn't exactly shocked to see myself in the Trib, but I was surprised. This is a pretty good world, all evidence to the contrary notwithstanding, and there are thousands of people doing thousands of good deeds every day, maybe millions. A kid helping out an old guy who fell off of a ladder and broke his leg was nothing special, but the picture sold it. Radar was caught in mid-lick, me with my arm around her neck and my head thrown back in laughter, and looking, dare I say, rather handsome, which made me wonder if Gina Pasquarelli, my daydream girl, had come across it. See what? Dad asked, tapping the caption. AP, Associated Press. That picture's probably in 500 or 600 newspapers today, coast to coast, not to mention all over the internet. Andy Warhol said eventually everyone in America would be famous for 15 minutes, and I guess you're having your quarter hour. Want to go out to Bingo's to celebrate? I certainly did, and while I was eating my beef ribs, the double rack, I asked Dad if he'd come with me to the hospital tomorrow to talk to a lady named Mrs. Ravensburger. He said it would be his pleasure. 9. We met in Ravensburger's office. With her was a young woman named Melissa Wilcox, tall and toned, her blonde hair worn in stubby, no-nonsense ponytail. She was going to be Mr. Bowditch's physical therapist. She did most of the talking, checking a little notebook from time to time so as not to forget anything. She said that after some discussion, Mr. Bowditch had agreed to allow her into his home twice a week to work on his range of motion and get him on his feet again. First with the Canadian crutches, the kind that metal circlets for arm support, and then with a walker. She would also take his vitals to make sure he was progressing nicely. and check on something called pin care, which you will have to do, Charlie. I asked her what that meant, and she explained that the rods going into his leg had to be swabbed regularly with disinfectant. She said it was a painful procedure, but not as painful as an infection that could lead to gangrene. I wanted to come 4 days a week, but he wouldn't have it, Melissa said. He's very clear on what he will and won't have. Tell me about it, I thought. He'll need a lot of help at first, Charlie, and he says you'll give it. According to him, Mrs. Ravensburger put in, you're his recovery plan. She was talking to me but looking at my dad as if inviting him to object, and he didn't. Melissa flipped to a new page on her little notebook, which was bright purple with a snarling tiger on the front. He says there's a bathroom on the first floor. Yes. I didn't bother telling her it was really small. She'd find that out on her first home visit. She nodded. That's a big deal because he won't be capable of climbing the stairs for some time. But he will be able to eventually. If he works hard, sure, he's elderly, claims he doesn't know exactly how old he is, as a matter of fact, but he's in good shape, doesn't smoke, says he doesn't drink, isn't carrying any extra weight. That's a biggie, Dad said. You bet it is. Weight bearing is a huge concern, especially in the elderly. The plan is for him to leave the hospital on Monday. There have to be safety bars installed on the sides of the toilet before then. Can you do that this weekend? If not, we'll push his release back to Tuesday. I can do it. I saw more YouTube videos in my immediate future. He'll need a urinal for nights and a bedpan for emergencies. You okay with that? I said yes, and I was. I had cleaned up vomit on more than one occasion. Dumping poo from a bedpan into the toilet might actually be a step up. Melissa closed her notebook. There are 1,000 other things, little things, most of them. This will help. Check it out. She took a pamphlet from the back pocket of her jeans. The title wasn't Home Care for Dummies, but it could have been. I said I'd read it and put it in my back pocket. I'll know better what's needed when I see the place for myself, Melissa said. I thought of taking a run up there this afternoon, but he's very insistent that I not go inside until he's back. Yes, Mr. Bowditch could be very insistent. I had discovered that early. Are you sure you want to take this on, Charlie? Mrs. Ravensburger asked. This time she didn't face check my father first. Yes. Even if it means staying with him the first 3 or 4 nights, Melissa asked. I tried to discuss the possibility of a rehab unit. There's a nice one called Riverview that has vacancies, but he wouldn't hear of it. Said he just wanted to go home. I can stay with him, although the thought of maybe sleeping upstairs in a bedroom I'd so far not even seen was weird. No problem. It's school vacation. Mrs. Ravensburger turned to my dad. Are you all right with this arrangement, Mr. Reed? I waited, not sure what he'd say, but he came through. A little worried about it, which is probably natural, but Charlie's responsible. Mr. Bowditch seems to have formed a bond with him, and he really has no one else. I said, Miss Wilcox, about the house. She smiled. Melissa, please, we're going to be colleagues after all. It was easier to call her Melissa than it was to call Mr. Bowditch Howard because she was closer to my age. About the house, don't take it personally like he's afraid you're going to steal something. He's just, well, I didn't know how to finish, but Dad did. He's a private person. That's right, I said. And you have to make allowances for him being a little grouchy, too, because Melissa didn't wait for because. Believe me, if I had an external fixator holding my broken leg together, I'd be grouchy, too. What's his insurance situation, Dad asked Mrs. Ravensburger. Can you say? Mrs. Ravensburger and Melissa Wilcox exchanged a glance. Mrs. Ravensburger said, I'm not comfortable going into detail about a patient's financial arrangements, but I will say that according to the bursar, he intends to take care of his expenses personally. Ah, Dad said, as if that explained everything. His face said it explained nothing. He got up, shook hands with Mrs. Ravensburger. So did I. Melissa followed us out into the hall, seeming to glide in her blinding white sneakers. LSU, I asked. She looked surprised. How'd you know? The notebook. Basketball? She smiled. And volleyball. Given her height, I bet she had a hell of a smash.